Alright, this is part 2 of the calculating equilibrium and surplus. We are now introducing a tax. So our inverse demand function is 80 minus 0.5q. Our marginal cost function is 50 plus 0.25q. And this is essentially our demand function and our supply function. We're now introducing a tax of 15, and I'm going to introduce it onto the consumer. So the way this is going to go is, imagine the consumer, you have your inverse demand function. What you have is this 80 minus 0.5q, and that tells you the price they're willing to pay. But now we're introducing a tax on top of it. So their behavior, this function right here, doesn't change. This still determines how much they're willing to pay. However, now we've introduced this tax on top of it. And that's how we introduce it into the function. But we know the tax is 15, so we can say 15 plus p equals 80 minus 0.5q. We can then subtract 15 from both sides to get p equals 65 minus 0.5q, and now we have our new inverse demand function, and we can go through all the same steps as we did in the prior video. So let's do that. We set the inverse demand function equal to the marginal cost function. So here we can subtract 50 from both sides to get 15. We can add 0.5 to both sides to get 0.75q. And then if we divide both sides by 0.75, we're going to get q equals 20. So our equilibrium q in this scenario is going to be 20. We can plug that into our inverse demand. It's going to be minus 10, so p equals 55. We could plug that in here too. 0.25 times 20 is going to give us 5. 50 plus 5 again gives us 55. So our new equilibrium quantity is 20. Our new equilibrium price is 55. Now we can go through those same steps as before to get our consumer and producer surplus. So let's look at consumer surplus first. We know that equilibrium quantity is 20, equilibrium price is 55. We can draw our graph. Equilibrium quantity occurs at 20, price at 55, and we need to find out where our demand curve intersects. The price axes, well, we had our inverse demand function from before. I don't know if you remember, but it was p equals 65 minus 0.5q. So when q equals 0, p is 65, so we're going to intersect there at 65. This is our equilibrium. So again, using the area for a triangle, half, base here, 20, times height, 10. It's going to give us 200 in here, divided by 2 equals 100. So I don't know if you remember before, but our consumer surplus was equal to 400. And now our consumer surplus is equal to 100. So it's declined by 300. When we look at, so this is demand. When we look at our supply, we have the same intersection as before. Marginal cost equals 50 plus 0.25q. So this occurs at 50. Going to get 1/2 base, which is 20, times height, which is 10. So that gives us 2 oh, I'm sorry, 5. So that gives us 100 divided by 2 is 50. So base 20, height 5, divided by 2, 50. So before, our producer surplus was 200, now it's only 50. So it's gone down significantly as well. Now to get tax revenue, we take our equilibrium quantity, because that's how many are sold, which is 20, times what the tax is, so that's the revenue per unit. So you get 20 times 15. And what's 20 times 15? That's going to be 300. So what's happened is we've transferred consumer surplus to the government in the form of tax revenue, and producer surplus to the government in terms of tax revenue. So this graph kind of gives half the picture of what's going on. I'm going to give the complete graph with tax revenue next. Okay, so this is what the complete graph looks like with the tax. We have our supply function, which is that marginal cost function we had before, intersects at 50 and goes up. Our two demand curves, one without the tax, so our demand curve without the tax, and then our demand curve with the tax. The demand curve without the tax intersects at 80. Demand curve with the tax intersects at 65. So what's going on here is that this is our equilibrium before the tax. So the area above the price and below the demand curve is our consumer surplus. The area below the price but above the supply curve is our producer surplus. After they introduce the tax, this is our new equilibrium value. So this is the price received by producers, but this is the price paid by consumers. So the consumer surplus is now only this area. The producer surplus is now only this area. And this area right here is the tax revenue. So if we kind of label these guys A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, then before tax, consumer surplus equals A, B, C, D. Producer surplus is going to be equal to E, F, G, and H. Now after the tax, and then if you remember before, consumer surplus was equal to 400, so that's half base of 40 times height of 20. That gives us 800 divided by 2, or 400. Producer surplus was a base of 40, a height of 10, so 400 divided by 2, or 200. Consumer surplus after the tax is just A. Producer surplus after the tax is just H. The tax revenue is now equal to C, B, E, and F. And the deadweight loss from the introduction of this tax is equal to D and G, because D and G are no longer in either surplus or in tax revenue. So by introducing this tax, C, B, D, E, F, and G were taken away from consumer and producer surplus. C, B, E, and F, or 300 total, was tax revenue, and the rest was lost, 150.